It's Les Person here, clinical psychologist, FlightWise Fear of Flying and other anxieties. Welcome to April 2021. It's the Easter weekend here in Melbourne. Quite warm as we move from summer into autumn. Daylight savings for us finishes tonight, so there's another hour difference between Australia and the United States and some parts of Europe who are going now to daylight saving. And of course, Easter in Europe is especially important because it does mark the official springtime, lots of festivities as well as religious observations. So, speaking of observations, this week I had the opportunity to meet over Zoom with a patient interstate, someone who has to fly on a regular basis for their work rather than for leisure, and it also means taking a variety of flights in terms of locations and types of aircraft, from your standard 737 jet, one of the world's most popular aircraft or populous aircraft, down to small single and dual engine prop jets into rather remote districts for their work. And the proposition is that sooner or later, once international travel in and out of Australia becomes much less restrictive than what it is now due to COVID, that my patient will need to fly into other countries in the vicinity for work. And so during the week, we had a catch-up session to see how the most recent flights have been going. My patient considers their work as one in progress, to continue to finesse their fear of flying, much of which is about turbulence, much of which is about unexpected turbulence, although it can be expected because of the locations into which they are flying, which is in very hot, arid districts of Australia, very rural and remote areas where lots of thermal activity can happen in the daytime because of the heat. It can get 45 degrees centigrade. So you get lots of thermal activities and lots of bouncing around as you come into land or even in midair. So it's important that my patient considers work as one in progress, and that after each collection of flights, we have a session together to review what they may have learned on this last flight. Something occurred during our session where I was told, I'm always looking forward to having a good flight. And I paused for a moment and asked my patient, have you worked out what it means to have a good flight? Because I had a very vague feeling that perhaps the search for a good flight may be doing my patient a disservice. In fact, a good flight might in fact mean I'm trying to have safety behaviors kick in. That is, if I can look up the weather ahead of time or the type of plane I might be on, then I can predict whether I will have a good flight. And my thinking always has been, you as the patient make this a good flight. The plane will do what the plane does, depending on weather, obviously, location, the airport you're flying to and from, things which are essentially outside of your control, other than making the decision to fly and then what you do on the plane. Think of it this way. There's a football team, a soccer team, a netball team. They have a big match coming up on Saturday or Sunday. When they go out onto the practice field on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday before the big game, if they're told, well, let's hope we have a good practice session, what does that actually mean? It's not the same as running out onto the field on the day of the competition, ready to take on your opponents, when someone says, have a good match. By that they might mean, I hope you win. But perhaps what they really mean is, I hope what you learnt in the practice field pays off with a win. But on the practice field, when you go out there in the afternoon or the evening, what are you actually practicing? Well, you're practicing drills and skills. Now, the whole team, of course, will do warm-ups together and running laps just to build up endurance, which the sports I've been talking about require. or they may go into the gym during the week, especially professional teams, and work on not so much skills as such, but strength and endurance. But when they're out on the practice field, they may split up into different teams. The defense practices certain routines, the offense practices certain routines. On a soccer match, the goalie practices certain routines, the strikers certain routines, the defenders certain routines, either both individually or as small groups. So practice, saying to someone, have a good practice session, might mean I hope you learn a lot on this practice session. I hope you hone your skills. Whereas saying have a good match is different. While you are dealing with your fear of flying and learning to become a much better flyer, I think it works well if you can treat each flight as a practice match. What are the skills I want to learn in each flight to take to the next one? And iteratively, slowly and surely build up a skill base so that no matter what gets thrown at me, I can manage this. So when my patient said, oh, I'm hoping that this will be a good flight, and I asked my patient, pause for a second, what do you mean by a good flight? They did pause and had to contemplate, well, what do I mean by that? And so to help my patient out, rather than saying, well, what would the other patients or passengers for that matter, I'm always being quite speculative here, what would the other passengers say? I said, think about the crew. Let's just imagine for a moment that a crew flies from Melbourne to Brisbane and they're getting ready to then do the next part of their day's work, Brisbane to Perth. Melbourne to Brisbane, about 2 and a bit hours. Brisbane to Perth, change of aircraft, will be maybe 3.5 to 4 hours. It's quite a long journey. But let's just imagine that they arrive in Brisbane, go to the crew assembly area, maybe there's an hour and a bit between flights, and there they meet a crew coming, say, from Sydney to Brisbane, an hour and a bit, who are going to join them on their next journey, Brisbane to Perth, 3.5, 4 hours. Maybe they know each other. Maybe it's the first time they're traveling and working together. And maybe they say to each other, hey, how was your flight up from Sydney or Melbourne? Oh, it was a good flight. What does the crew member mean by it was a good flight? Think about this. It's not going to be the same as a passenger saying. Certainly a fear of flying passenger saying, oh, it was a good flight. For them, it means it was smooth, absence of turbulence, absence of worry. Didn't have to kick in anything special. But for a crew member, let's stay with cabin crew for a moment before we go to the tech crew. The cabin crew member might say something else. When I asked my patient, what do you think the cabin crew would say to each other? Their first response was, we left on time. Straight away, we left on time. And I said, you're right. That's probably going to be one of the first things that crew members talk about to each other about what made for a good flight. We left on time. Timely departure, meaning a timely arrival, meaning we weren't rushed between flights. It also means we weren't rushed to do the meal service. Imagine if you're delayed half an hour on the ground and the crew are trying to make up time, the tech crew trying to make up time, so we're not falling too far out of schedule. It means that the in-flight service is going to be a little bit rushed. You don't get a chance to take a breather. You are on the go for the entire flight. So for the crew, not such a great flight. We're working really hard. What might also make for a great flight or a good flight? You should have seen who was in seat 1A. It was celebrity A or politician B, and they were great. I got a selfie with them. I got an autograph. They were such fun to be with. Or it was a really rotten flight. The passenger in 1A was so demanding. It was only 12 o'clock and they wanted to be fed champagne all day long or all flight long. It was just a yucky flight. They were all pains in the ass in business class, also demanding. On the other hand, Sally, down the back, who's joining the flight, may have been flying up with a whole football team who are going up for the weekend's big match. Her favourite football team. She got to meet all the players. They were so friendly back in coach. Selfies, autographs. She says, I had a great flight. Her criteria are different. you'll notice that none of the cabin crew are probably going to say, oh, it was a bad flight because of turbulence, or it was a good flight because there was no turbulence. If turbulence comes into the picture for them, it's because we've got to stop what we're doing, do our checks that everyone's got their seatbelt on, make sure that all the things under the seats are pushed forward for safety. Maybe even if it's a 4 out of 5 on the turbulence scale, they might get a call from the pointy end saying, we're heading into a little bit of turbulence, we're not going to be able to get around it or climb above it. It's going to get quite bumpy, so I need you to take your seats. Put everything away, take your seats. It'll be about 20 minutes. That's what's going on. That disrupts the service and makes passengers a bit cranky. They've got to work a bit hard. Let's now go to the pointy end. What makes a good flight for the crew, the tech crew, the pilots? Well, maybe it's, again, on-time departure. Maybe things are working out well, and instead of being told when you leave Melbourne, climb now to 5,000, climb now to 7,000, climb now to 11,000, okay, now you can go all the way through. Lots of work to be done. That's not a bad flight, it just means they're working hard. Compared to taking off, and this is what's been happening lately because there's been so few movements, taking off, call in, Qantas 476, 1,800 foot runway heading. They may then be told, Qantas 476, standard departure, climb now to flight level 240. In other words, don't worry about climbing out in steps and getting lots of instructions, just go straight out to flight level 240, which is essentially, halfway to the destination they're going to. Much less workload, go on to autopilot pretty soon, go into monitoring phase rather than lots of communication backwards and forwards. In other words, the workload is lighter. Maybe that means a good flight for them. In other words, I need you as a fear of flying person looking to get over this to define what you mean by good flight. Let's have a look at some of the ways you can deceive yourself by saying, I need to have a good flight. I need to be able to use the latest apps which are showing all the weather. There's been some new apps. There's another one that just came out yesterday I saw, organized by a pilot, using the same sort of information that pilots are using to judge the forecasted weather. Why? Because we need to know what our alternatives might be at the landing site. What's the chances that we'll engage in fog or some other operation that may cause us to delay, which means we need extra fuel. Maybe there'll be bumps along the way due to jet stream activity. You can see that in this picture here. Pilot on Twitter each night shows what the American jet stream activity will be like, where there's likely to be clear air turbulence, and then can tell the crew about 2 hours out from our destination, it's going to be a bit bumpy, try and get the meal service finished by then. So this is the planning that makes for a good flight by the tech crew. Okay, so you need to ask yourself, do I need to know all this information? Ultimately, it may make a difference. Maybe you'll choose a different aircraft, maybe one you think will handle turbulence better if it's going to be a difficult day in terms of weather. But ultimately, you may not get much of a choice. In fact, your choice may be taken from you. You may have decided to book that one flight between San Francisco and Newark, or San Francisco and Washington, that's on a 777, because I like wide body, because I'm much better on a wide body aircraft because I get claustrophobic in a 737. And there's only one flight going on a 777. All the other ones are smaller, and all of a sudden, for whatever reason, the 777 is taken out of service, used somewhere else, and you're on a 737-900 long tube. Now what you going to do? I want you to be able to get to a position you say, well, that would be unfortunate, I wouldn't like it, I'd really like my first choice, the 777, if I could get it, but I need to get to Washington, I need to get to Newark, and do I really want to wait overnight at my expense, if I can make that change, so I can get onto a 777, okay? So there are times when you will get a choice of aircraft, depending on what time of the day, and other times there is no choice. You just got to accept what's thrown at you. And also, there can be changes made when you arrive at the airport. You think, oh, I'm in good shape here, I've got my A330 exit row seat. Changed. Maybe that flight was cancelled for whatever reason, and now you're lumped together in a really full 737 back of the bus. You have a choice, you don't have to take it. But if you have to be somewhere, you've got to be somewhere. So be wary of using I need to have a good flight in order to fly, and whether you're deceiving yourself. Be careful of the self-talk. I have to be on this plane. There can't be turbulence, otherwise it's a disaster in the making for me. I have to be in an exit row. I have to have a window seat. I have to. Be careful of having hafters. You can convert them into want to or wanters. I'd like to have this. I prefer this, but it's a preference. Be wary of falling into demands. I cannot do this until this demand of mine is met. That I'm guaranteed it's going to be really fine weather. I'm guaranteed to get my seat of choice, my meal of choice even. These are all safety behaviors. These are all almost superstitious ways of saying, I can't do this unless these conditions are met. And you will not do yourself any great service by setting up these conditions. So the next time you fly, start to be a bit mindful of your have-tos rather than your like-tos. I'd like this if this was in the offing. I'd like it if I could get my preferred seat, but I could do this anyway. Okay? So I hope this is useful. Reconsider what makes for you a good flight, and then start to put that into practice. Maybe watching some other YouTube videos, maybe contemplating what makes for you a good flight in this new way of thinking about it, rather than the must be a good flight, otherwise I can't do this sort of way. That will only perpetuate your fear. I hope this has been useful. More videos to come soon. Bye for now.